Jai Jai Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda Jai Advaita Chandra Jaya Gora Bhakta Vrinda
Jai Jai Shri Chaitanya Jai Nityananda Jai Advaita Chandra Jai Gaura Bhakta
Jai Jai Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda Jai Advaita Chandra Jai Gora Bhakta Vrinda
Jai Jai Shri Chaitanya Jai Nityananda Jai Advaita Chandra Jai Gaura Bhakta
Jai Jai Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda Jai Advaita Chandra Jai Gora Bhakta Vrinda
Jai Jai Shri Chaitanya Jai Nityananda Jai Advaita Chandra Jai Gaura Bhakta
Molly, did you print out something? Okay, thank you. Hare Krishna. All right. So today's January 15th, 2021, and it's the anniversary of the appearance day of Srila Jiva Goswami. And so Prabhupada talks about Jiva Goswami quite a bit. And so just to give some idea, this is some quotes from Srila Prabhupada about Srila Jiva Goswami. Prabhupada refers to Jiva Goswami as the greatest scholar and philosopher in the world. He writes, "We request Dr. Radhakrishnan to study the Sat Sandarbha of Srila Jiva Goswami. He was especially empowered by his spiritual masters to direct his writings toward the scholars and philosophers and make them understand this esoteric knowledge. Another philosopher of his stature is yet to be born. In fact, no one in the future will be able to surpass him in erudition. We hope that since Dr. Radhakrishnan is a philosopher, he will not reject Srila Jiva Goswami's precepts." Radhakrishnan, he was the former vice president of India, and he made commentaries on Bhagavad Gita. Prabhupada writes, "Jiva Goswami was the greatest scholar till now. Nobody can compete with Jiva Goswami's scholarship in Sanskrit and philosophy. The world's best philosopher and Sanskrit scholar was Srila Jiva Goswami." And Prabhupada continues, "And Sri Jiva Goswami, the nephew of Rupa Goswami, in the learned circles still in Bengal, they say such a big scholar in philosophy, there was none, and nobody expects a similar philosopher and learned scholar in the future. He was such a big personality, Jiva Goswami. Big Mayavadis. They were afraid of Jiva Goswami's logic and argument to establish the Vaishnava philosophy." Okay. So we're reading from Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, Adi Leela, chapter 2, text 10. Okay. And we can see Prabhupada's going to refer to Jiva Goswami in the purport there. Okay. Prakasha Visheshe Tenha Dare Tina Nama Brahma Paramatma Ara Svayam Bhagavan Prakasha Visheshetena Daretina Nama
Prakasha Visheshetena Dharetina Nama
Brahma Paramatma Ara Swayam Bhagavan
Brahma Paramatma Ara Swayam Bhagavan
Prakasha Visheshetena Daretina Nama
Prakasha Visheshetena Dharetina Nama
Brahma Paramatma Ara Swayam Bhagavan
Brahma Paramatma Ara Swayam Bhagavan
Prakasha Visheshetena Daretinanam.
Prakasha Visheshetena Dharetinanam.
Brahma Paramatma Arasvayam Bhagavan.
Brahma Paramatma Ara Swayam Bhagavan.
Prakasha Viseshetena Daretinanam.
Prakasha Visheshetena Daretinanam.
Brahma Paramatma Ara Swayam Bhagavan.
Brahma Paramatma Arasvayam Bhagavan.
Prakasha Visheshetena Dharetinanam.
Prakasha Visheshetena Daretinanam.
Brahma Paramatma Ara Swayam Bhagavan.
Brahma Paramatma Arasvayam Bhagavan.
Prakasha Visheshetena Dharetinanam.
Prakasha Visheshetena Daretinanam.
Brahma Paramatma Ara Swayam Bhagavan.
Brahma Paramatma Arasvayam Bhagavan.
Prakasha Vishetena Daretinanam.
Prakasha Visheshetena Daretinanam.
Brahma Paramatma Ara Swayam Bhagavan.
Brahma Paramatma Arasvayam Bhagavan. Hare Krishna. Would anyone online like to recite the verse?
Prakasha Visheshetena Daretinanam.
Prakasha Visheshetena Daretinanam.
Brahma Paramatma Arasvayam Bhagavan.
Brahma Paramatma Arasvayam Bhagavan.
Prakasha Visheshetena Daretinanam.
Prakasha Visheshetena Daretinanam.
Rama Paramatma Swayam Bhagavan.
Brahma Paramatma Arasvayam Bhagavan. Okay, we'll go to the word for word. Prakasha,
Prakasha
of manifestation.
of manifestation.
Visheshe,
Visheshe
in variety.
in variety.
Tenha,
Vinha
he.
he
Dare,
Dare
holds.
holds.
Tina,
Tina
3.
three.
Nam,
Nam
names.
names.
Brahma,
Brahma
Brahman.
Brahman.
Paramatma,
Paramatma
Paramatma super soul.
Paramatma Super Soul.
Ara
Ara.
and
and
Svayam,
Swayam
himself.
himself.
Bhagavan,
Bhagavan.
the Supreme Personality of Godhead.
The Supreme Personality of Godhead.
Translation. In terms of his various manifestations, he is known in 3 features called the impersonal Brahman, the localized Paramatma, and the original personality of Godhead. Purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Srila Jiva Goswami has explained the word Bhagavan in his Bhagavat Sandarbha. The personality of Godhead, being full of all conceivable and inconceivable potencies, is the absolute supreme whole. Impersonal Brahman is a partial manifestation of the absolute truth realized in the absence of such complete potencies. The first syllable of the word Bhagavan is Ba, which means sustainer and protector. The next letter Ga means leader, pusher, and creator. Va means dwelling. All living beings dwell in the Supreme Lord, and the Supreme Lord dwells within the heart of every living being. Combining all these concepts, the word Bhagavan carries the import of inconceivable potency and knowledge, energy, strength, opulence, power, and influence, devoid of all varieties of inferiority. Without such inconceivable potencies, one cannot fully sustain or protect. Our modern civilization is sustained by scientific arrangements devised by many great scientific brains. We can just imagine, therefore, the gigantic brain whose arrangements sustain the gravity of the unlimited number of planets and satellites, and who creates the unlimited space in which they float. If one considers the intelligence needed to orbit man-made satellites, one cannot be fooled into thinking that there is not a gigantic intelligence responsible for the arrangements of the various planetary systems. There is no reason to believe that all the gigantic planets float in space without the superior arrangement of a superior intelligence. This subject is clearly dealt with in Bhagavad Gita, where the personality of Godhead says, I enter into each planet and by my energy they stay in orbit. That's 15:13. Were the planets not held in the grip of the personality of Godhead, they would all scatter like dust in the air. Modern scientists can only impractically explain this inconceivable strength of the personality of Godhead. The potencies of the syllables ba, ga, and va apply in terms of many different meanings. Through his different potential agents, the Lord protects and sustains everything, but he himself personally protects and sustains only his devotees, just as a king personally sustains and protects his own children, while entrusting the protection and sustenance of the state to various administrative agents. The Lord is the leader of his devotees, as we learn from Bhagavad Gita, which mentions that the personality of Godhead personally instructs his loving devotees how to make certain progress on the path of devotion, and thus surely approach the kingdom of God. The Lord is also the recipient of all the adoration offered by his devotees, for whom he is the objective and the goal. For his devotees, the Lord creates a favorable condition for developing a sense of transcendental love of Godhead. Sometimes he does this by taking away a devotee's material attachments by force and baffling all his material protective agents. For thus the devotee must completely depend on the Lord's protection. In this way, the Lord proves himself the leader of his devotees. The Lord is not directly attached to the creation, maintenance, and destruction of the material world, for he is eternally busy in the enjoyment of transcendental bliss with his internal potential paraphernalia. Yet, as the initiator of the material energy as well as the marginal potency, the living beings, he expands himself as the Purusha avatars who are invested with potency similar to his. The Purusha avatars are also in the category of Bhagavat Tattva, because each and every one of them is identical with the original form of the personality of Godhead. The living entities are his infinitesimal particles and are qualitatively one with him. They are sent into this material world for material enjoyment to fulfill their desires, to be independent individuals, but still they are subject to the supreme will of the Lord. The Lord deputes himself in the state of supersoul to supervise the arrangements for such material enjoyment. The example of a temporary fair is quite appropriate in this connection. If the citizens of a state assemble in a fair to enjoy for a short period, the government deputes a special officer to supervise it. Such an officer is invested with all governmental power, and therefore he is identical with the government. When the fair is over, there is no need of such an officer, and he returns home. Such an officer is compared to the Paramatma. The living beings are not all in all. They are undoubtedly parts of the Supreme Lord and are qualitatively one with him, yet they are subject to his control. Thus, they are never equal to the Lord or one with him. The Lord, who associates with the living being, is the Paramatma or supreme living being. No one, therefore, should view the tiny living beings and supreme living being to be on an equal level. The all-pervading truth, which exists eternally during the creation, maintenance, and annihilation of the material world, and in which the living beings rest in trance, is called the impersonal Brahman. Hare Krishna. And I'm just going to read the Sanskrit and text of the next verse, text 11. This is it's a key verse from the Srimad Bhagavatam. Text, interesting, because this is chapter 2, text 11 of the Adi Leela, and the verse appears in Bhagavatam in Canto 1, chapter 2, text 11. So I don't know if Krishnas Kaviraj Goswami did that on purpose, or it just fell that way. So the verse is Vedanti tat tatvavidas tatvam yajganamadvayam brahmeti paramatmeti bhagavaniti shabdyate. Learned transcendentalists who know the absolute truth say that it is non-dual knowledge and is called impersonal Brahman, localized Paramatma, and the personality of Godhead. Okay. Om Gyanatimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayamrupa Kadamayam Dadati Svapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavams Cha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Saganaraganatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakam Vitam Cha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurange Radhe Vrindavaneshware Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Panchakalpatayubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Vyeva Cha Patitanan Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Desha Tarine Shri Rup Shri Sanatan Bhatta Raghunatha Shri Jiva Gopala Bhatta Dasa Raghunatha Nana Shastra Vicharanaika Nipuno Sadharma Samstapaka Lokanam Hitakarina Tribhuvane Manyao Suranyakara Radha Krishna Padaravinda Bhajana Nandina Matalika Vande Rupa Sanatana Raghu Yoga Shri Jiva Gopalaka Vande Rupa Sanatana Raghu Yoga Shri Jiva Gopalaka. I offer my respectful obeisances unto the 6 Goswamis of Vrindavan, namely Shri Rupa Goswami, Shri Sanatan Goswami, Shri Raghunath Das Goswami, Shri Raghunath Bhatt Goswami, Shri Jiva Goswami, and Shri Gopal Bhatt Goswami, who are very expert in scrutinizingly studying all the revealed scriptures with the aim of establishing eternal religious principles for the benefit of all human beings. Thus, they are honored all over the 3 worlds, and they are worth taking shelter of because they are absorbed in the mood of the gopis, and they're always absorbed, engaged in the service of Sri Sri Radha and Krishna. Prakasha Visheshe Tenha Daretina Nam Brahma Paramatma Arasvayam Bhagavan. In terms of his various manifestations, he is known in 3 features called the impersonal Brahman, the localized Paramatma, and the original personality of Godhead. Vedanti tat tattva vidas tattvam yajganamadvayam brahmeti paramatmeti bhagavaniti shabdyate. Learned transcendentalists who know the absolute truth say that it is non-dual knowledge and is called impersonal Brahman, localized Paramatma, and the personality of Godhead. So, again, today's the appearance day of Jiva Goswami, and so we know Jiva Goswami, and we know all these past acharyas, these great pure devotee spiritual teachers. We know them through our current link to the Parampara, Srila Prabhupada. Just like we know Krishna through our current link to the Parampara, Srila Prabhupada. The simple example is given. I can say, oh, I want a direct relationship with the book, with the print on the book. I want a direct relationship. But actually, yes, but so I can say these glasses are in the way. They're in the way between me and a direct relationship with the print. In a sense, it's true. They're in the way. I mean, but actually, because these nicely designed glasses, in a sense, they're in a way, but actually they enhance my direct relationship with the print. Okay, so similarly, our relationship with personalities like Jiva Goswami, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, Krishna, Radharani, Lord Chaitanya, Lord Nityananda, our relationship with them, we go through the pure lenses of Srila Prabhupada, and that enriches, enhances, makes possible our direct relationship with them. It's like a simultaneous one in difference. Yeah, we go through, not direct, and by going through the glasses, our relationship becomes more direct. Same analogy extended a bit is like if I want a direct relationship with the stars in the sky. I want my eye in the stars. Okay, but then if I look through a telescope, same principle, a telescope has a whole series of finely crafted lenses, and by looking through by looking through the telescope and all those series of finely crafted lenses, then I have a direct relationship between my eye and the stars. So that the finely crafted lenses, that's the parampara, the line of spiritual masters. And so, so Prabhupada, he connects with us where we're at, and he gives us kind of what we need to know for our cleansing of heart and our progress in Krishna consciousness and spiritual life. So he gives us what we need to know about Jiva Goswami and Bhaktisiddhanta and the teachings of Lord Chaitanya. And still, once in a while, like on these special days, appearance day of Jiva Goswami, a few weeks ago we had the disappearance day of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, we might read something directly from them. And so Prabhupada, in the first line of this purport, he says, Srila Jiva Goswami has explained the word Bhagavan in his Bhagavat Sandarbha. Here's a copy of Bhagavat Sandarbha. And like if we, so, let's see. Okay, so just some translation of Bhagavat Sandarbha. In his auspicious invocation, Jiva Goswami writes, this is English translation, for the pleasure of the two sages, Srila Rupa Goswami and Srila Sanatan Goswami, I am rearranging this book, compiled by Sri Gopal Bhatt Goswami, who was born in South India. Some parts of his book were in order, some out of order, while others were incomplete or missing. After thorough deliberation, Sri Jiva now writes it in the appropriate order. And then in the first verse of Bhagavat Sandarbha, Jiva Goswami's giving this Vedanti Tat Tattva Vidas verse. Then he describes the first part of that verse. That's Bhagavatam 1.2.11. Hare Krishna, describes absolute reality in a general manner, characterized as non-dual consciousness. Then the second part elaborates the absolute more specifically. Quote, this non-dual consciousness is referred to as Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. This one non-dual absolute thus manifests its own existence in one of these three aspects in exact accordance with the specific qualification of the worshipper. Thus, in Srimad Bhagavatam, as well as in some other texts, the one absolute truth is addressed by three names. In some places, the absolute is called Brahman, in others Paramatma, and in yet others Bhagavan. But it should be noted here that since Srila Vyasadeva witnessed a clear distinction between the absolute truth and the individual self in his trance, Srimad Bhagavatam 1.7.4-6, the absolute was not referred to as Jiva in this verse. So Jiva Goswami is referring to Srila Vyasadeva, the compiler, the writer of all the Vedas. And after he wrote the Vedas, he summed them. Really, the summation and conclusion of all of the Vedas are in two books, Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. And before he wrote Srimad Bhagavatam, Srila Vyasadeva went into a trance, Bhakti Yogena Manasi, a trance of bhakti. Samyak Pranihite Malay, Apashat Pusham Purnam, Apashyam, Mayam Chatar Apashyam. And then in that trance, he had vision of the absolute truth and its different components. He saw Sri Krishna, and behind Sri Krishna was his energy Maya, and emanating from Bhagavan Sri Krishna's Paramatma and the impersonal Brahman. And Yaya Samo Hito Jiva Atmanam Sri Gunatmakam. Paropi Manote Nartam Tatkritam Chabipadyate. And the Jiva, the Jiva, that's us, we are called Jiva, spirit souls. That we are not absolute truth. We are servants of Bhagavan, the supreme absolute truth. Anarto Pashamam Sakshat Bhakti Yogam Adhokshaje Lokasya Janata Vidvams Chakri Lokasya Janata Vidvams Chakri Satvata Samitam. So Vyasadeva saw that so in his compassionate trance of bhakti, he saw that we, the Jiva spirit souls in this age called Kali, that we are really suffering. And the root cause of our suffering is misidentification of the eternal spirit self with the temporary material body. And he saw what we're suffering. And the solution is Bhakti Yogam Adhokshaje. The solution is engage in heartfelt, loving, devotional service to Sri Krishna Bhagavan. And then he saw that it's a very clear, easy solution. And that most all of the people in this age, they will not get it. Even with all the Vedas he wrote, they will not understand it. So then as a result, he wrote the Srimad Bhagavatam. And that's the 30-volume set. Psychedelic set here, red set here. Okay, there's black sets, blue sets, but that's the Srimad Bhagavatam. For us to get bhakti, for us to get devotional service. And just, okay, if we, in Prabhupada's purport, Prabhupada really dissects this word Bhagavan, right? So Prabhupada, Prabhupada, we read earlier, Prabhupada says he says many statements like, Srila Jiva Goswami is the greatest scholar and philosopher in the world. You think, well, it can't be a stronger statement than that, but it gets even stronger. Yeah, right. Yeah, and in the future there will never be, right. And Sri Jiva Goswami, the nephew of Rupa Goswami, in the learned circles, still in Bengal, they say such a big scholar in philosophy. There was none, and nobody expects a similar philosopher and learned scholar in the future. He was such a big personality, Jiva Goswami, big Mayavadis. They were afraid of Jiva Goswami's logic and argument to establish the Vaishnava philosophy. Another philosopher of his stature is yet to be born. In fact, no one in the future will be able to surpass him in erudition. Okay, so when we if we read a little Jiva Goswami, the astuteness of his intellect is unfathomable, and we can hear Prabhupada's appreciation. And so, okay, so this is from Sandarbha, Bhagavat Sandarbha. Okay, and then he talks about the absolute truth is pure consciousness and the ultimate of that which is to be attained. It is one, devoid of any internal or external divisions. It is eternal and is called Brahman by the Gyanis. The same absolute truth is called Paramatma by the yogis and is situated unperturbed in the heart of every living being. It is called Bhagavan by the devotees, while learned scholars call him Vasudev. And so now here's one. We can see Prabhupada's a scholar of the Goswamis. So Jiva Goswami writes, O sage, he's quoting Parasara Muni, O sage, the letter Ba has two meanings, nourisher and supporter. Okay, we see that in Prabhupada's purport too. The letter Ga has three meanings, leader, carrier, and creator. The six qualities of controlling potency, inconceivable power, fame, wealth, knowledge, and absence of attachment, in their totality are called Bhaga. All the living beings reside, Vasanti, in Bhagavan, who is God within and the self of all creation, and he also resides in them. This is the meaning of the letter Va. Therefore, he is the imperishable reality. The word Bhagavan means complete knowledge, sensory power, bodily strength, controlling power, inconceivable power, and effulgence or beauty, devoid of any repelling quality. So we can see that coming through in Prabhupada's purport. So again, importantly, so we understand, so that's what current link means. We understand Jiva Goswami through Srila Prabhupada, okay? So again, sometimes on special days, we might read directly from Bhaktisiddhanta, Bhakti Vinod. Even that goes through Srila Prabhupada. Otherwise, as far as like, okay, my recommendation, as far as like studying directly the books of previous acharyas, my recommendation is, like, if you have an inspiration, do it after you've read all of Prabhupada's books at least 3 times. That's my honest recommendation. You're laughing, that's my honest recommendation, okay? And when I say all of Prabhupada's books, I'm talking about what I consider his 54 major books where he's translating and purporting the Sanskrit from the Vedas. I mean, there's other books which are like transcriptions of his lectures. They're wonderful too. But 54 major books. 54 is the way to win, as everyone knows. Okay, so now the reason why I say that is not just like sort of some rule, you're just making up numbers here, 3, 54, what's that? No, but because the idea, and not just the idea, the vital principle is that if we go to previous acharyas, we endeavor, if we go anywhere, like if I read a book on personal growth, or I read a book about the history of World War II, and I've read all these books in recent history. If I read a book, if I read a novel, I read novels, whatever I read, I want to see and process whatever I read through my current link to the disciplic session, Srila Prabhupada. I want to relate to whatever I read, whatever I hear, whatever I see on the internet. I want to relate to it through through the pure lenses of Srila Prabhupada, just like the telescope analogy, so that I process it in a way that enhances my Krishna consciousness, that enhances my self-realization, that infuses me with more spiritual potency rather than bewildering me. And so, and so that's why if we're going to go anywhere, including, even especially, because the previous acharyas, they're writing for a different audience. Whatever they write, it's pure, it's transcendental, but it's not necessarily directly meant for us. In general, it's not. In general. For example, there's one previous Acharya who Jiva Goswami quotes a lot, and Prabhupada quotes a lot, Sridhar Swami. He's like the main commentator on Bhagavatam. Lord Chaitanya talks about him a lot with such love and affection. And much of Jiva Goswami, much of what he writes, he's writing to those who are very impersonally oriented, Mayavadi oriented, not accepting the personality of Godhead. So some of his commentaries, it sounds like he's advocating a non-personal conception of the absolute, but he's connecting with a certain audience where they're at. That's just one example. So otherwise we can get confused. If we try to go to previous acharyas without seeing them, understanding them through our current link, we can get confused. And so to really get like a firm grounding, a firm foundation in Prabhupada, I recommend read all his books at least 3 times, like that. It doesn't mean like, don't dare go to one page of a previous acharya or the personal growth book. But as a general principle, I'm quite serious about that. Now, Jiva Goswami, especially important, like Srila Prabhupada, he, before he came to the West on the Jaladuta, at 70 years old, having 2 heart attacks on the Atlantic Ocean there, he was residing in Vrindavan. He was residing at a temple called the Radha Damodar Temple. And that temple was established about 500 years ago by Srila Jiva Goswami. Yes. Yeah. So, yes. So that temple, so Prabhupada, he was like absorbed directly for years of his life, even physically in Srila Jiva Goswami. And so reading Prabhupada's writings, we don't go too far without hearing about Srila Jiva Goswami. One way he refers to this, Jiva Goswami was a prolific writer, dozens and dozens of books. 7 of his books are called the Sandarbhas. Sometimes Prabhupada refers to the 6 Sandarbhas. The Bhagavat Sandarbha is the second. The first one's the Tattva Sandarbha, which establishes Bhagavatam as the most sublime way to receive knowledge which is beyond our senses. So Srila Prabhupada, he often quotes Srila Jiva Goswami in the Bhagavat Sandarbha as saying, to understand God, Prabhupada quotes this a lot, and he references Jiva Goswami as saying this. And Jiva Goswami not just says it, he expands on it in the Bhagavat Sandarbha. And so, to understand God, the first qualification is to accept that God is inconceivable. Now that can seem like a contradiction. It's not. Because God is inconceivable. Also, that means you just need to have blind faith. You can't know anything. No, not at all. It means to understand God, it starts with accepting that God is even bigger than, even greater than my brain. That's hard for David Wolf to accept, that there could be an entity like bigger than my brain can accommodate. Yeah, no, it's challenging. I'm still wrestling with it. But that's essentially what Jiva Goswami is saying. And that's a core principle in the Sandarbhas, in Jiva Goswami's writings, in all Vaishnava writings. And then we go, oh, so we can't know anything? No, we can know. We can understand the inconceivable. But it requires a different method than, let's call it, the inductive method of, in Sanskrit terms, prajaksha and anuman, studying with my senses, what's called the modern empirical method. There's a different method. We often give the example, just like what to speak of God. If we want to know a person, the way to really know a person, well, if I say, okay, I'll analyze you and observe you, maybe I'll understand something, She likes these colors. He seems to like that kind of music. Maybe I can understand something by my observation. Come into my laboratory. But if I really want to get to know a conscious entity, an evolved conscious entity like a human being, then the way to know is to serve, is to gain your love and trust. And then you choose to reveal yourself to me with more and more intimacy. So there's prameya, which means that which is known, and there's praman, how we know. So to study a particular prameya, to study a particular thing, object, we need a proper praman. It's like, yeah, like if I want to know what's the temperature, and I have a radio. Well, radio can connect you with different frequencies and sound vibration. Well, I got a radio. I just want to, is it 20 degrees Celsius? No matter what you do with the radio, you're just not going to get the temperature. So similarly, even to know an equal conscious entity like each other, the kind of come into my laboratory and I'll study you, it's limited. So the way is we gain love and trust, and then the person reveals himself to me, heart to heart. So we can think, to understand the absolute God, the Supreme Personality, is it going to be more effective to use a method that's effective for like studying non-conscious objects like plastic, or the love and trust? The love and trust applied to the Supreme, that's called bhakti. That's devotional service. And then the inconceivable reveals to us more and more about the nature of the Supreme Person. So to accept that God's inconceivable, that with my limited material mind, that's not going to happen. And then I engage in a different epistemology, loving devotional service. And then the absolute personality of Godhead reveals himself to us in spiritual transcendence. And this idea of inconceivability, this is so much here in Jiva Goswami's writings, here in this purport. It's not illogical or irrational. I'll call it's transrational. It's transcognitive. It includes and transcends everything we could get by ordinary rational logical means. And importantly, actually right after class yesterday, it was as I asked a question to Ladini Shakti, as I asked a question, and afterwards, yes, exactly. Through love and devotion, Krishna reveals himself to us. We cannot take heaven by storm. Of course, here we're talking not about heaven, but about Vaikuntha. So this idea of inconceivability, it's not just for the spiritual realm. It is for the spiritual realm and spiritual persons. But also the material energy is inconceivable. That's what Jiva Goswami is saying in part of what we read. All of God's energies are inconceivable. And even if we take God out of it, just even in basic modern science, this idea is there. So after class yesterday, Ramachandra and I spoke briefly because as they asked about the soul being 1,000th the size of the tip of a hair. So we looked at it that, okay, so in mathematics, what's the dimensions of a point? A point has no dimensions. A point has no dimension. There's no length or width or breadth. And a line is made up of many points, and a line has length. So these are both empirical facts, and they are contradictory. They are not logical by ordinary logic. But just in modern science, it's an inconceivability, but it's accepted because it's empirically true, because the dimensions of a point are 0. 0 times a trillion is 0. 0 times a quadrillion is 0. A line is made up of many 0 points, and a line has length. That's not 0. So this is inconceivable but it's true. but it's true. Or what else? There's so many things like that, even if we take God and spirit out of it, that you just need to accept it because it's empirically true, even though it's contradictory to conventional rationality. Light is a particle. Light is a wave. Well, particles and waves are different. Light is both, right? So you just need to accept that in order to enter deeper into the truths of physics. I know what I was always a part of mathematics. I was always fascinated. They call it imaginary numbers,
Yes.
right? The square root of -1.
Yeah.
So so they call it I, but they call it an imaginary number. Imaginary number. I mean, it doesn't exist, but it does exist. You might not believe this, but I studied electrical engineering for some years. And the electrical engineers, they really use these imaginary numbers, and they are real, but they're imaginary. And these are just many examples, even in that, because all of Krishna's energy, material and spiritual, are inconceivable. And so to accept they're inconceivable, then we can enter into different ways of realizing them, different ways of realizing the inconceivable. It's not a contradiction. And so Jiva Goswami starts this Bhagavat Sandarbha with this Vedanti tat tatvavidas tatvam yajganamadvayam brahmeti paramatmeti bhagavaniti shabdyate. 3 aspects of God realization. And they're one, they're non-dual. They're one and they're different. They're one because they're all spirit. They're all such Chidananda. They're not made of matter. They're not subject to material changes. And at the same time, they're different aspects that are revealed according to the heart and consciousness of the soul. Just like an example Prabhupada often gives is like if there's a town on the mountain in the distance and we're driving. So from a distance, it looks like some fuzzy cloud. So that represents the Brahman, non-personal realization of the absolute. As we get closer, we can see, oh, it's not a cloud. Oh, actually, I can see there's buildings, and that looks like a school. That's probably the city hall. Ah, okay. Then as we actually drive up the mountain into the town, we can go, okay, yeah, that is a school. And there's Mr. Jones, and that looks like the mayor of the town. And there's Betty Smith. Very personal. Now, when we're at a distance, it's not that the town is just a cloud, but our perception of the cloud, because we're not real close to it, it's just amorphous cloud. But even when we're at a distance, the cloud still is full of life and personality, and Betty Smith, and there's a playground where the children are playing, and et cetera, et cetera. But so similarly, when an aspiring transcendentalist is still pretty distant from the absolute, it appears like a cloud without differentiation. Krishna said, Brahmano hi pratishtaham. I am the source of all the impersonal Brahman. As we get closer to the absolute, then there's Paramatma realization, God in the heart. And as we get closer, then there's Bhagavan realization. That's the book that Prabhupada refers to here from Jiva Goswami, the Bhagavat Sandarbha. And with another metaphor, I used this maybe a month or two ago in some class. Just like, let's say there's a symphony orchestra, I don't know, playing Mozart or Tchaikovsky or Beethoven or something. So there's a symphony orchestra. And then after the performance, after the concert, say if you ask maybe someone like me, I might say, yeah, I liked it. It was good. That's about all I can give you. I liked it. It was good. Okay. But then, and that's true. So that is true. I liked it. It was good. But then let's say someone who who has music appreciation, it was music appreciation, might say, yes, I was so I was so moved how the strings and the percussion and the violins and then the horn section. I don't know what they would say because it's not my field, it's not my department. But they could probably speak on and on with emotion, and what they're saying includes, I liked it, it was good. Okay, so similarly, Bhagavan realization includes Brahman and Paramatma realization. Okay, just to I'll close my part here. So just read some excerpt from Srila Prabhupada's purport to Canto 10, Chapter 346. Srila Jiva Goswami says that unless we accept the energy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead as inconceivable, beyond the conception of our words and mind, we cannot understand the Supreme Lord. So it's not saying we can't understand the Supreme Lord. We can, and we need a different way of knowing than trying to control with our mundane mind. And that way is called bhakti. Similarly, Prabhupada's purport, Canto 10, Chapter 13. Thank you. Anandini says, I liked your class. It was good. Yeah. Hare Krishna, she's got to go. Thank you for being here, Anandini. Okay, good. Actually, she clearly understood the purport of the class. Okay, so Prabhupada writes, this is the last chapter of the Bhagavatam that Prabhupada purported, 10:13, text 57, right towards the end. Brahma was mystified about Krishna's opulence, Nija Mahimani, because this opulence was atarkya, or inconceivable. With one's limited senses, one cannot argue about that which is inconceivable. Therefore, the inconceivable is called achintya, that which is beyond chintya, our thoughts and arguments. Achintya refers to that which we cannot contemplate but have to accept. Same, yeah, because basically it's a real thing, not just in math, but in electronics and so many things. Square root of -1. You just have to accept. A line has definitive length, and it's made up of points with 0 dimension. Just have to accept. Similarly. Okay, achintya refers to that which we cannot contemplate but have to accept. Srila Jiva Goswami has said that unless we accept achintya in the Supreme, we cannot accommodate the conception of God. This must be understood. And in closing, I'll tell one story that Prabhupada tells probably several times about Jiva Goswami. Some of you might be familiar with this story. So Jiva Goswami, he's the nephew of the elder Goswamis. The elder Goswamis are Rupa and Sanatan, Sri Rup, Sri Sanatan, Bhatta Raghunatha, Sri Jiva Gopala Bhatta Dasa Raghunath. That's a song that describes the 6 Goswamis. So the elder Goswamis are Rupa and Sanatan, and they had another brother, Anupam, also known as Vallabha, and his son was Jiva Goswami. So he was like a generation younger. And so they're all in Vrindavan, and there's some scholar going around India, kind of like in modern day, you have like the champion wrestler or boxer, and who will challenge the champion sport wrestler or boxer? Who will challenge? So you had like this scholar, and he came to Vrindavan, and he heard that like Rupa and Sanatan, they were like, big scholars. So he challenged them. And Rupa and Sanatan, they could see that this guy's really a joker, and he's not really serious about exchange, about truth, about real sangha, about really deepening realization of truth. So they said, well, we don't want to fight you. And he said, okay, well, will you sign my book that you acknowledge that I defeated you? So they both said, sure. Yeah, we'll sign your book. Good. We'll sign your book. Yeah, they didn't care. So then, later in the day or a day later, whatever, he got around to Jiva Goswami, And Jiva Goswami saw that he had in his book the signatures of his uncles, Rupa and Sanatan. So for Jiva Goswami, he was infuriated. This was intolerable. Prabhupada sometimes talks about some Sahajiyas criticized Jiva Goswami for that. But Prabhupada said, no, this was a good, this was transcendental use of anger. So Jiva Goswami says, okay, let's go. And then, however we want to put it, Jiva Goswami smashed him, defeated him. He just leveled him to the ground with Shastra, with logic, etc. So that's a story about Jiva Goswami.
He was very young at the time.
He was young, yeah.
Like 16 or something.
He was probably pretty young, yeah. But for him, it wasn't false ego. He was infuriated that this scholar was, got the signatures of his uncles, and because he couldn't understand, his uncles just didn't care about someone who didn't really care about truth, was only ego motivated. So Jiva Goswami says, okay, let's do it. Let's have a debate. And he smashed it. Hare Krishna.
He wanted to reestablish the reputation of his students, his teachers.
Correct. Okay. Prakasha Visheshetena Dare Tinanam Brahma Paramatma Ara Swayam Bhagavan. In terms of his various manifestations, he is known in three features called the impersonal Brahman, the localized Paramatma, and the original personality of Godhead. Vedanti tat tatvavidas tattvamyajganamadvayam brahmeti paramatmeti bhagavaniti shabdyate. Learned transcendentalists who know the absolute truth say that it is non-dual knowledge and is called impersonal Brahman, localized Paramatma, and the personality of Godhead. Thank you for your presence and attention. I welcome any comments or questions at this time.
Relaxing.
What's that?
It was really stimulating.
It was stimulating, okay. Well, okay, to warm things up, I can read a little bit more directly from Jiva Goswami. Okay, so I'll just. Okay.
Who gave the translation to?
This is translated by Satyanarayan Das. He's a graduate of the Sofitel Foundational Seminar, and after the seminar, I heard a few of his classes, and he's using terms like grungies and payoffs and things like that. So, okay. So this is chapter 12. Jiva Goswami writes, the internal potency Swarup Shakti and the external potency Maya Shakti are diametrically opposed to each other. Furthermore, though each has many functions that are opposite to their counterparts, still their support is one, Bhagavan. Daksha speaks the following verse to the Lord, and this is from Bhagavatam 6:431. Let me offer my respectful obeisances unto the Supreme All-Pervading One. Endowed with unlimited transcendental qualities, his potencies keep the philosophers with their differing views in a state of continual bewilderment, sometimes agreeing and sometimes disagreeing among themselves. Indeed, their arguments remain ever inconclusive. And then Jiva Goswami continues, Bhagavan's potencies are the source of dispute and consensus for the contenders of various philosophies. The rest of the verse's meaning is self-evident. And going to 15, chapter 15. These energies are inconceivable, as Devahuti says to Kapila Dev, quote, you are the guide and regulator of the living beings and possessor of thousands of inconceivable potencies. That's from Bhagavatam 3.33.3. Jiva Goswami continues, the meaning is clear. Two sutras from Brahma Sutra, that means Vedanta Sutra, also state that Bhagavan's energies are inconceivable. And then he quotes from Vedanta Sutra. The Vedas state that the Lord is free from defects and can be understood only by Shabda, and variegated energies exist inherently in him. Thank you. Len Cohen.
Thank you, David. Yeah, I have a question. So, so God is going to reveal himself to you based on your sincerity and your devotional service. Otherwise, he's inconceivable. So, does he reveal himself in stages in order, like first as the impersonal Brahman, and then he will reveal himself to you as Paramatma in the heart, and then finally, if your devotional service is super, super excellent, then he'll reveal himself as a personality of Godhead. Does it work like that at all, or what did they say about that?
Well, thanks for your question, Len. I would say in a conventional standard sense, that is how it works. And God, Krishna, he's not confined to reveal himself according to any particular order like that. But like in the conventional Vedic system, like one works their way up, maybe through many lifetimes, through different varnas, Sudra, Vaishya, Kshatriya, then a Brahmin. A Brahmin means one who knows Brahman, the impersonal aspect of the Supreme. Then from Brahman realization, then one meditates more and more inward and gets Paramatma realization. And again, this could be over lifetimes, thousands of years. And then as one develops their connection with Paramatma more and more, then they develop more and more of a devotional heart. Well, I want to serve this special person in my heart. And that requires understanding that I am not Paramatma. I am the Jiva soul. And then that leads more and more to Bhagavan realization as the devotional heart is uncovered. So that is the conventional order. At the same time, especially in our line coming from Srila Prabhupada and Jiva Goswami, we're kind of going directly to, just like reading Bhagavatam, we're going directly to Bhagavan realization. And that includes Brahman realization. And so that's why, it can be, it can take some very interesting forms, because like let's say in the standard ancient yoga path, one comes to Brahman realization, then maybe some super soul realization. They're not yet as progressed to Bhagavan realization. So in one sense, they're not as advanced as maybe someone new or not so new in practicing bhakti yoga and chanting Hare Krishna. If we're chanting Hare Krishna, we are studying Chaitanya Charitamrita. We are Bhagavan realized. we are Bhagavan realized. At the same time, practitioner bhakti might have different habits that show that, whereas in one sense they're more elevated than the yogi who is Brahman or Paramatma realized, but also the bhakti or bhakti yogi might have other aspects of their life that are very, very degraded and very below Paramatma or Bhagavan realization. But still, like if someone is chanting Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, studying Chaitanya Charitamrita, following Srila Prabhupada, that shows Bhagavan realization. So there's the conventional path, which goes through the order you mentioned. And then there's the sort of bhakti elevator that Prabhupada gives us. And so just because Prabhupada gave it to us, we're very fortunate. We do have that most inclusive aspect of realization of the absolute, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we are steady in Bhagavan realization. In many ways, we might be way below Brahman realization.
Yeah, because my sense is that there's sort of a disparagement at looking at the impersonal aspects of God, and that not it's just looked upon as a much lesser way of connecting with God, the impersonal Brahman, as opposed to God as a personality, you know, a Krishna, or as to the Paramatma. So is this just, I don't know where I'm picking up this idea from, but
No, there's no. We certainly don't want disparagement. There's a purport in Bhagavad Gita where Prabhupada says there's no conflict between the personalist and the impersonalist. That rasoham apsu konteya prabhasmi sasi suryayo. Those who prefer the impersonal realization, they might realize God in God's energy as water, as light, as sun, as sound, whereas the personalists prefer to connect with the personal source. Prabhupada says there's no conflict. In one place in Bhagavad Gita, Prabhupada writes in his purport, there's the personalists, the impersonalists, and then there's the devotees. Meaning that the devotees aren't in some camp. I'm in the personalist camp. I'm in the impersonalist camp. The true devotee appreciates all aspects of realization of God, of realization of the absolute. And so there ought to be no disparagement. Now, when Prabhupada makes heavy statements about Mayavad and personalists, that's not about the impersonal realization of God. To come to genuine energetic, non-personal realization of the Supreme, that's an amazing spiritual achievement to be honored. The problem becomes if someone who's appreciating the Advaitavad, the non-differentiated energy of the absolute, well, that's great. But then if they take a rigid stance that there's nothing beyond that, and that Krishna or Nrsingadev or the whole Vaikuntha world, that's all Maya, that's all illusion, because the ultimate in spiritual enlightenment, there's no form, ultimately God has no form, no hands, no legs. If due to envy or ignorance or whatever, one who's inclined to the impersonal feature then denies the personal feature and misleads others and veers them away from the heart's natural flow towards bhakti, then that's where Prabhupada and the Vaishnavacharyas, then they take a strong stand against those who are denying the personal form qualities of the Supreme.
I appreciate that distinction. Thank you. That clarifies things for me. Yeah.
Thank you, Len.
I read yesterday a letter that I think somewhat the end is connected to what.
Are you hearing Ramachandra? You're able to hear? Good. Please continue.
And Prabhupada at the end of the letter, he says, chant regularly Hare Krishna and you will find that he's talking with you face to face.
Chant regularly Hare Krishna and you'll find he's talking with you face to face. Yeah. Right. So beautiful. Again, the impersonal realization of the absolute, that's beautiful. That's like, it's an amazing spiritual achievement that very, very few achieve. But then if someone who's aspiring towards that then denies the personal aspect of God, denies the beautiful form of God. There's a verse in the Ishopanishad, Hiranmayena Patrena Satyasya Pitam Mukam Tattvam Pushana Pavrinu Satyadharmaya Drishtaye. It's the Upanishads themselves, and they're praying to the Lord, and they're saying, Hiranmayena Pat, please remove your dazzling effulgence. Please remove your glaring effulgence so we can see your beautiful face. Okay, so that's like, yeah, so they are there's many examples. There's Shukadeva Goswami was impersonally realized, and then he was attracted to the beautiful pastimes of Krishna. The four Kumaras were impersonally realized, but they had no envy in their heart. And then they got attracted to smelling the flowers and the tulasi leaves that were offered with love and devotion at the feet of Lord Vishnu. Then they became loving personalists. So if someone aspiring for impersonal realization due to envy or whatever, tries to deny or block the personal aspect, then that becomes very very painful for the devotee of Krishna. It becomes a roadblock. Yes. Thank you, Lynn and Ramachandra. Thank you all for your presence and association. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. All glories to Srila Jiva Goswami ki jai.
Srila Jiva Goswami ki jai.
Yeah.
Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Jai.
Sri Chaitanya
Hare
Charitamrita.
Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Bol. I'm going to make